last year. In May of last year, Kieran Murphy found a halfpenny coin on a laneway in the Ballynaback Road outside Poyntzpass, and that coin was dated 1781. And on the front of the coin, it had a picture of George III, and on the back of the coin, it said Hibernia, 1781. And I mean, George III, as you know, was King of Great Britain and King of Ireland when the two things were combined. He was the king during the American War of Independence, during the Napoleonic Wars, and he suffered some mental health issues in his later years. But unlike his two predecessors, he was born in England and he actually spoke English as his first language. But that event of finding the coin made us think, well, maybe we should do a talk on other interesting finds that have happened over the years. And so I sat back and I had a look at this, and I thought, well, probably there's enough finds in order to do a talk, even though some of these have maybe already been covered in some of our earlier talks. But I've come up with sort of 7 finds, mostly in the 19th century, that have happened in our local district. So the area I'm going to cover in this talk is finds which have happened around the Poyntzpass area here, Lochbrickland, Tandragee. So these are the locations that these finds have happened, and I'm just going to go through each of these in turn. So this is like a series of short stories, I guess, this particular talk. Now, the first find I'm going to talk about is the Bell of Ballynaback, and I will apologise here. I've spelt it a little differently from what's in our advert and what's been mentioned in previous articles. But the Bell of Ballynaback was very well documented by our own Ross Chapman in the 9th edition of the magazine, Before I Forget. And if you want to read more detail about the Bell of Ballynaback, then I suggest you go to that 9th edition of our magazine, which is available also on our website. But the spelling I'm using here is a spelling from the 1830 Ordnance Survey map, and there is a bit of debate within our History Society about how you spell that particular townland. But the first mention of this bell was in 1664, when Jeremy Taylor, who was the Bishop of Down and Connor, mentioned it in his book called Dissuasive from Popery. And he notes that the existence of a bell which was rung before a dying person to protect him from purgatory. And the bell was passed down from father to son. Now, in 1664, the 1641 Irish Rebellion was still quite fresh in memory. And Oliver Cromwell had just completed his tour, let's say, in 1649 to 1650. So people were quite nervous about things like ecclesiastical handbells. And Jeremy Taylor was well known for his vigorous enforcement of conformity. So we believe that the bell was hidden around that time. But it did turn up again. And it was found in 1725 in Relics graveyard. So when it was found in Relics graveyard, which is a small graveyard between Poyntzpass, Tandragee and Scarva in that area, it was passed back to the ancestral owners, if you like, the Hennons. So Paul Hennon held the bell in the late 18th century. It was then passed to his, actually was passed to his cousin, a man called Henry Bell. And it was went from Henry Bell then to another, Paul Hennon, before it was then eventually end up with Bernard Hennon in the start of the 19th century. Okay, so Bernard Hennon had the bell, and for whatever reason, when Whether Bernard Hennin was perhaps having financial troubles, or maybe it was, was something around, this is around the time of the famine, at the start of the famine. But Archdeacon Soren of Sligo purchased the bell in 1840 from Bernard Hennin, and he purchased it on behalf of Henry Dawson, who was the Dean of St. Patrick's Cathedral in Dublin. The details of the bell at this time were documented by a collector called John Bell. These names are all very appropriate, but John Bell is from Dungannon, and he did. I'm going to mention John Bell's name again later in this talk, but John Bell did document the details of this handbell. And following that, I mentioned that Archdeacon Soren bought the bell on behalf of Henry Dawson, and whenever Henry Dawson passed away, he gave the bell. The bell was given then to the Royal Irish Academy, and it's currently on display in the National Museum of Ireland in Dublin. So the bell has been around quite a bit. I should have mentioned earlier that we believe the bell was made around the 10th century, and that's because of the inscription on the bell. The inscription on the bell here, if I just go to the laser pointer, the inscription on the bell here says a prayer to Cumasach, son of Allel. And those are names that are mentioned in the Annals of Ulster, which ties the bell down to around the creation of the bell was around the 10th century. So it is obviously a very, very old bell that was rung to attract people to church services. And as I said, it's currently sitting in the museum in Dublin. There's also a replica of the bell displayed in the Senate in Dublin. That replica was made in 1947, I believe. And the image of the bell is also on the crest of one of the local primary schools in Dublin. So we have quite a local connection, and there is also a national connection of the bell with the various communities here. And on the next slide, I just wanted to give you an idea of this. I want to talk roughly quickly about where the bell was found. First of all, okay, so this is the road from between Poyntzpass and Tandragee, and here we see Relicon Graveyard. It says Relicon Graveyard here, and this is where the bell was found. But it's actually called the Ballynaback bell. Okay, this is the 1830 Ordnance Survey map. It's called the Ballynaback bell, and that's because it was most likely associated with this old church, which is no longer. There's no sign of any church here at the moment, but the bell was associated with this particular church. Okay, now you can see there's a river flowing between the two graveyards, like so. And I'm told that that in the past, the two graveyards, this one was for Catholics and this one was for Protestants. And there's a story that Redmond O'Hanlon, the rapparee, was buried in here, but I don't believe that's true. So the two graveyards there were two separate graveyards for the different communities. Ballynaback means the townland of the bend, and there's obviously a bend in the river here, so that's how that got its name, Ballynaback, the townland of the bend in the river. Similar to, if you like, Cullybackey. There's a bend in the river where Cullybackey is. Relicarn is actually two words, Relly and Carn, both of which mean graveyard. So that just basically means graveyard, graveyard, graveyard. Relicarn graveyard. So it's a very old name, Relicarn. This 1830s map is quite an interesting map because it shows here, as well as the river flowing between the two graveyards. We can see here on the very right, Scarva Lake, and Scarva bog. I'm going to talk about that bog later on in the presentation. We also see here a little thing here that says feeder, and this is the feeder. This is the feeder that took water from up near the River Cusher down to the Newry Canal. So the water was flown from the River Cusher, and if I was able to go on up here, you would see an aqueduct, and that aqueduct is still visible today. But that aqueduct was carrying water along here to the Newry to Portadown Canal. So this is where the bell of Ballynaback was found, and is currently in the museum in Dublin. And there is a picture of yours truly beside the bell. And I wanted to include this just to give you an idea of the size of the bell. It's about 1 foot high, so it's quite heavy. And therefore, if somebody's swinging that bell to call people to a church service, it isn't a young person doing it. It's quite a strong man who's going to be swinging that bell. But yeah, that's the bell of Ballynaback. Which I've covered. So I'm going to move on then to the next artifact. So I'm going to cross into County Down, and we're crossing the railway here and the canal over to Lisnagade Fort. Is where the next interesting artifact was found. And if I was in a room, I would ask you, does anybody know where this building is? Well, it's obviously Lisnagade House, a fine building. And Lisnagade House was built by Edward Hill Trevor. He was a son of Major Trevor from Lochbrickland. And Edward Hill Trevor married Lucy Mary Trevor, and she was the daughter of Major Trevor from Ross Trevor. Now, I should say that the Trevor family have been around Lochbrickland for a lot of years, really since the plantation. And in fact, Edward's great-great-great-grandfather was imprisoned in Newry during the 1641 rebellion. And he was imprisoned alongside Charles Poynts and Henry Bagnall. And that same, his great-great-grandfather would have known Marmaduke, what's the surname? Let me just check here, see my notes. Marmaduke Whitchurch. Marmaduke Whitchurch built a castle in Lochbrickland in the 17th century, and Edward Trevor was basically dating Marmaduke Whitchurch's daughter, and she was called Ross. So Edward Trevor married Rose married Rose. Rose Whitchurch. So she became Rose Trevor, which is where the name, it's a long way getting to this story, it's where the name Ross Trevor came from. So what I'm saying here is that the Trevor family have been around quite a while, and in fact he's called Edward Hill, and I suspect in his history that he's also connected to the hills of Hillsborough and Hill Street in Newry. But after their marriage in 1827, Edward Hill Trevor started building Lisnagade House, which we saw on the previous slide. And after he built the house, he started clearing the fosses around Lisnagade Fort. And by fosses, I mean the ramparts around the fort. And when he was doing this, he found various coins. He found an old cauldron, spearheads, and other things, which unfortunately, I don't know where those coins are or where the cauldron is, but my suspicion is that they were probably sold to the likes of John Bell, who I mentioned in the previous slide, from Dungannon, or Isaac Glennie from Glenview in the townland of Savilmore in County Down. Those men were well-known collectors of old artifacts. And if they were purchased by Isaac Lenny. Then we'll see later on that Isaac Lenny's son William donated all of his artifacts to the Ulster Museum, so there could well be some of the coins that were found in Lisnagade in the Ulster Museum, though I can't prove it one way or the other. So just to show you again what I'm talking about here, this is an aerial view of Lisnagade House, and it's right smack in the middle of the three forts of Lisnagade. So here is Lisnagade Fort. This is Lisnawhelan Fort, and over on the left here we have Lisnavara Fort. So you can imagine then if you've ever been to these forts, it's a very impressive view from Lisnagade House. Very impressive. Okay, moving on then. So I've dealt with Ballynaback Graveyard, Lisnagade Fort. I'm going to then now move down south to Lisnagonnell Bog. So this is about a couple of miles below, south of Loch Brickland and close to the dual carriageway from Belfast to Dublin. So here is a picture of Lisnagonnell Bog, and at the start of the 19th century, what you would have seen if you're looking at the same picture is you would have seen a 40-acre lake with a crannog in the middle. So similar to Loch Brickland Lake, which has a crannog, this was a lake with a crannog in the middle, somewhere around here. And at the start of the 18th century, whoever owned it decided that he would drain the lake in order to farm fuel and peat from the base of the lake. And when he did that, then they discovered a number of items of antiquity, such as bones, spearheads, etc., etc. Now, one of the things that they did find in the bog in 1824 was a dugout canoe or a log boat, and that was by a man called Buchanan. Don't know his full name. And just in the neighbouring townland, in Menin Bog, which was also drained, they found a dugout canoe in 1826. And then in 1894, James Buchanan, who was a son of the previous Buchanan, found another dugout log boat. So that's basically two log boats found in Lisnagonnell Bog. Now, the dimensions of these log boats were captured at the time. So the one in 1894 was 25 feet long, 3 feet wide, and the base was 3 inches thick. Now, if you can imagine the sort of tree that was built from, it must have been huge. And you will not see any trees of that size in the neighbourhood today. And even if the effort in cutting that sort of a log boat out from that tree with very sort of rudimentary tools will be an incredible job. But the bottom line here is that the log boat, we don't know where the log boat is. It's either rotted away or disappeared. But all of the above was reported by the clergyman in Loch Brickland at the time, who was called Reverend Henry Lett, and his name's going to crop up again in this talk. Now, if I go back up here, if you are in the neighbourhood here and you feel you want to go over here and try and find that that crannog, I would strongly urge you not to, because you will sink very, very quickly. It is definitely very, very, very you will sink. The current location, as I said earlier, was of the canoes and the log boats is unknown. So unfortunately, we can't show you what was found, but I can show you a log boat that from the museum in Dublin, which is very, very similar to the Lisnagonnell log boat. That one was found actually in Galway. It's a bit longer than the Lisnagonnell log boat, but that's basically what it would look like. Okay, so next I'm going to head back up over into County Armagh and nip up to Tandragee rectory. And what was found in Tandragee rectory a number of years ago was the Tandragee idol. And I just need to check my notes here. The Tandragee idol is the one on the left. Sorry. The Tandragee idol is the one on the right. Okay. So what does the idol mean, or what is it? Well, it's really down to a legend. And it's said that this idol represents Nuada, who was the ruler of the Tua de Danann tribe. And that tribe arrived in Ireland and they challenged the incumbents to a battle. And during that battle, Nuada lost an arm, his left arm. The Firbolg were defeated and then moved westwards to the Aran Islands. But Nuada had to stand down as ruler of the tribe because his body was not complete. But luckily, a physician was able to build Nuada a new arm out of silver, and he was able to take his kingship up again. So that's the legend of Nuada. And you can see here, as I said earlier, he's holding his left arm. Notice also he's got a couple of these horns here on his head. So again, I don't know, it seems to be quite a number of statues from older years put horns on people, but I'm not too sure why that is. Now, how did the idol end up in Tandragee? Well, sometime in the 1800s, it was part of a collection of stones held by a guy called Thomas Tennyson from Portnelligan, which is near, just east of Middletown in County Armagh. So he was a major collector of these statues. In the late 1800s, he passed it to Reverend John McAdoo, who was the rector of Ballymore in Tandragee. And John McAdoo put it in his garden as an ornament. Probably didn't realize how ancient or how its value, but he used it basically as an ornament. John McAdoo and Thomas Tennyson were probably knew each other as youngsters because they grew up in neighbouring townlands, but they were also connected through marriage and in-laws. So I think that Thomas Tennyson may have gifted John McAdoo the statue. Now, in the early 1900s, then it was passed from Tandragee to the museum in Belfast, and then at some point later, it was passed then to St Patrick's Cathedral in Armagh, where it sits today, and that's it in the cathedral in Armagh. Okay, so we're going to go now from Tandragee. We're actually going to have a wee commercial break, actually, would you believe? Because quite often some of the finds in history turned out to be not finds. So I'm just going to quickly take a wee commercial break here and go through some near misses, if you like. The first one was a vein of silver discovered during the construction of the railway from Newry to Armagh, and this story was relayed to us by Sarah and Minnie Savage from Lissummon. And the story is that whenever the navvies were building the railway to Armagh, they came across a vein of silver. Now, it was probably lead or tin, but the navvies dug up 2 truckloads of silver and then brought it to the management of the construction company. Now, the management were obviously, on the one hand, delighted to see this. On the other hand, they realized that they were going to have to possibly circumnavigate this vein of silver if it turned out to be that way. Therefore, if they're going to have to do that, then they would not be able to complete the railway on time, and therefore they would lose a lot of revenue. So what they decided to do was dump the silver in a nearby bog. So we don't know where the bog is. We don't know where the vein of silver is, but it's a story that certainly sounds to be a lot of truth in it. The second story again came from the savages in Lissummon about a pot of gold in the townland of Lisnagade in Lissummon. Now the story is that a family of brothers lived on a farm in Lisnagade, and a couple of the brothers emigrated to America. And when he was in America, he had a dream that there was a pot of gold in his brother's land back home. And he happened to be talking to a guy who was also originally from Lissummon. And he told his friend exactly where he in his dream that the gold was going to be. And this friend then told his family back home, and under the cloak of darkness, his family went out to the land and started digging for the pot of gold. Unfortunately, they didn't find a pot of gold. They found a pot of maggots. So the story is that and it's obviously true, is that the fairies decided to take the gold away and keep it safe and replace the gold with maggots, so that the gold wasn't lost from its rightful owners. That's probably a true story. And the last story of a near miss is quite close to the home. Actually, my neighbour's farm is called Ivy House, and I was told this by my brother that the previous owners, Herbert McGuinness, again, somebody had a dream that there was gold in a field, and he dug for 3 days trying to find that gold, but never found anything. And up until a few years ago, that hole was still visible in that field beside Ivy House. Well, I'm told by my brother Felix, but my brother Felix does sometimes pull my leg, and he hasn't stopped laughing from the time that I wanted to go to Shanks's farm and get a ride on Shanks's mare. Anyway, back to the main story here. So I'm going to go from Tandragee down to Drumbanagher estate. And in 1807, there were a pair of giant Irish elk antlers found in Scarva bog. And those antlers were then preserved by John Reddy in Scarva House. But a few years later, in 1814, a pair of horns of the palmated deer type were found 9 feet under the surface of a peat moss bog on the estate of John Moore and Drumbanagher. So, palmated deer means that the horns are webbed, of the webbed kind, which is similar to the picture here. You can see it's sort of a webbing. And that means that it's not a deer, it's actually the ancient Irish elk that they found these horns. Now, these horns were eventually acquired by, I say acquired, I don't know whether John Bell from Dungannon paid some or not, but they measured from tip to tip 11 feet 10 inches. So from one tip here to the tip over here was 11 feet 10 inches. So the horns were huge. Now the antlers that you can see here that I've got on the screen are from they're from a place in Scotland that sells antlers, and these are actually the same dimension as these ones here. So they could well be the ones that were found in Drumbanagher, but it's most unlikely. But these would fetch, in the auctions, these would fetch 26 to 30,000 pounds. So if you do happen to find a set of Irish elk antlers in your back garden, then you'd be very lucky. Now, one of the reasons you don't normally see these things these Irish elk, and you don't see any Irish elk walking about these days, and that's because Irish elk became extinct about 11,000 years ago. So up until then, they would have roamed around Ireland, but the last one died out, we believe, around 11,000 years ago. The other interesting thing about this is that the Irish bogs didn't start forming until around 7,000 years ago. So the lowland bog in Scarva and the lowland bog in Drumbanagher wouldn't have existed whenever the Irish elk died. So me in my naivety thought that this Irish elk had walked down to the bog one day and maybe was going to sort of drink some water, and just with the weight of its antlers had just sunk into the bog. Well, that would not have happened because the bog didn't exist. The Irish elk simply would have died and fell wherever it was, and was eventually then encapsulated as the bog built up around it over those number of thousands of years. So that's the Irish elk. I'm now going to move from Drumbanagher back up to back into County Down and to a place called Drumsala Monastery. So Drumsala Monastery, or I should really say friary, prospered in the 15th century. I think it was at its height around 1440, 1450, 1460, but it closed in the year 1569, and that is ties in with the dissolution of the monasteries, which was initiated by Henry VIII and Thomas Cromwell. There was a bit of a lag between England and Ireland. The English monasteries were dissolved first, and then the Irish monasteries were dissolved later. But Drumsallagh Friary would have prospered in the 15th century. And if you can see in this picture, you can see there are some lines here which are just, there was some kind of a shape here you can just about make out, and there are some stones here. That is where the old monastery, Drumsala Monastery, Drumsallagh Friary was. The friary was actually built on the location of an even older church and graveyard, and it is said that that there were 3 saints buried in that graveyard. So that older church would have been going back to maybe the 10th or 11th century, or even earlier. And then the stones from the old church and the monastery were reused in the building of the Church of St. Menin in Knockbrickland, which stands in Knockbrickland today. So from 1569, the friars disappeared from the area, and the friary started to deteriorate and demolish, and some of it was reused, as I said below, in the rebuilding of other churches. But there have been a number of finds from Drumsala, and the first one here is a photograph I took. You can just about see on the stone the carving of a Celtic cross. I've just made it a bit more explicit here. So that carving is there, that stone is there today. I've also learned that William Fyvie in the early 19th century, William Fyvie lives in Union Lodge, or Lisnagade Lodge. William Fyvie actually took a stone away from Drumsala, which had a picture of St. Francis feeding the birds. So there's a wee bit of homework for Fiona and Edwin Bryson, if they're on the line, is to see, can they find that stone with St. Francis feeding the birds, which came from Drumsala Monastery. I'm actually going to concentrate on 2 items which were found in Drumsala. And the first one is the bell of Drumsala. So this bell was found in 1835, and it was passed to a different William Fyvie than took away the St. Francis stone. This is William Fyvie, the son of the other William Fyvie. This particular William Fyvie, we know, was into his horses and gambling, and I think he probably welcomed the fact that this church handbell turned up in his land. He would have made a bit of money from it. In fact, the first thing he did is that he sold the bell to the guy I mentioned earlier, John Bell from Dungannon. Well, John Bell was an artist, a teacher. He taught in the Royal School in Dungannon. He was also a very keen historian, and he was the first one to actually document anything about the Danes caste, which runs close to Lisnagade and Poyntzpass, etc. Now, John Bell was known for collecting bells, and in 1852, his collection formed a major exhibition in Belfast. So that bell would have been on display in Belfast in 1852. John was originally from Scotland, so whenever he retired, he took all of his artifacts back with him to Scotland. That would have probably included the Irish antlers, possibly coins from Lisnagade, and the Drumsala bell. And that Drumsala bell was later then donated to Edinburgh Museum, where it is on display today in Edinburgh Museum. And all of that information then on the bell was captured by the Canon William Lett from the parish of Lochbrickland. So the second find that I want to talk about in Drumsala is a golden torque. So the bell was found in 1835. This torque was found a bit earlier. Whoops, wrong direction. The torque was found in 1794 by a woman who was married to John Burns, and Mrs. Burns was from Ballynaback, which is a townland on the far side of Lochbrickland from Drumsala. But she walked over the fields to visit her mother in Drumsala townland, and as she was walking past some workmen who were basically digging foundations for a new barn, she noticed in the soil that was being displaced, she noticed this thing which was quite bright, and she picked it up. There's a picture of what she found, and she took it, she washed it, and she took it back to her husband. Her husband then took it to Nielsen's watchmakers in Banbridge, and I think he got about 6 guineas or 6 shillings from it or something. But he sold it to Nielsen's in Banbridge. And just to show you here, Nielsen's have been in Banbridge for quite a while. There's a clock face dated 1787. I think at some time afterwards they emigrated to New Zealand, so they're not there now. But Nielsen's had the torque at that point. Now, the vicar of a Haderg who was working in Brickland, Dr. Osborne Shield, somehow or other got wind of this find, and he told then Bishop Thomas Percy of Drumore that he should acquire the torque as treasure. Now, Thomas Percy didn't just go and claim the torque as treasure. He actually did give the people money for the torque, and that was really to encourage them that if they did find anything else of interest in Drumsala, that they should bring it to him rather than sell it or whatever. So there's a picture of Bishop Thomas Percy. But on Thomas Percy's death, it was passed to one of his two daughters, Elizabeth, and Elizabeth had married another clergyman called Mead. So the torque then stayed in the Mead family for over I think about 100 years, nearly 100 years rather. But when the last Mead, the executors of the last Mead in that line, it sold it, and it kind of disappeared, the torque, for lots of years, until it was purchased then by Lady Bridget Parsons of Birr Castle. And so thankfully it turned up, and we now know that it's currently in the possession of Lord and Lady Ross of Birr Castle in County Offaly. And well, there's a picture of Alison Ross and her husband with the golden torque, and with any luck, Alison is on this call. I'm not sure if she's able to make it or not. So the torque went through a bit of a journey in finding its way to Birr Castle in County Offaly. I just want to talk a little bit about the torque itself. So it was found in this sort of coiled shape, and today it has been uncoiled into how it would have looked when it was worn back in the days of the Celts who wore it. The reason it's called the torque means twist. So you can see that the gold in this torque is twisted. And there's a very, very good video from the Ulster Museum showing, which was shared to me by Greer Ramsey of Ulster Museum. And in it, Greer shows you how these twists were made. Okay, it's a very fine piece of metalwork. But whenever the owner of the torque passed away, it would have been twisted like this, coiled like this, so that nobody else could wear it. So a lot of the torques that have been found have been in this twisted shape to stop somebody else wearing it. So it would have been buried probably with their with the owner. I'm not sure why the torque ended up in Drumsala Monastery. That's another piece of investigation required on that. Now, if I look at a number of other torques, I've just picked up one here, the Cambridgeshire torque, which was found back in the year 2000, I think it was. This particular torque, the Drumsala torque is worn around the neck. The Cambridgeshire torque is worn around the waist. So this is basically Celtic bling you're looking at here. You can see here from the shape of the Cambridgeshire torque, it's very similar to the Drumsala torque, and even the end parts are very similar. But notice how that the Drumsala torque is actually a bit missing here, because there should be two ends to the torque. Now this is interesting because whenever Thomas Percy first got the torque, he noticed in looking at the records that that the weight of the torque had got a bit lighter from where it was from when it was originally found. So I think Nielsen had weighed the torque to be something like 10 grams, and whenever Thomas Percy got the torque, it was 8 grams. So he smelled a rat that somebody had snipped a bit off and maybe kept it for themselves and sold it separately. That may or may not be true. It may have broken off. The owner may have broken it. Who knows? Or maybe somebody did. Maybe Nielsen or some of the other handlers did break a bit off for themselves. But it's certainly incomplete when you compare it to other torques, like the Cambridgeshire torque. Now, finally, when on Drumsala, I just want to give a wee personal story here. I never knew where Drumsala is, even though I'm from Poyntzpass and I know Loch Brickland. I didn't know where Drumsala was. So I drove around the countryside asking people, have you any idea where Drumsala is? And eventually I was pointed in the direction of this man here. And I went down, this is Norman McGaw. And I went down to Norman's house and I knocked on the door and I said, hello, I'm Hugh Daly from Poyntzpass. And Norman said, are you a son of Joe Daly? I took a step. How did he know that? Well, it turns out that Norman didn't know my father, and when Norman was a youngster, him and his dad came to my dad's farm, and my dad had an auction in 1968, and in that auction, Norman's dad bought this buckrake from my dad, and Norman showed me the buckrake is still laying on his farm. So it turns out that my dad had probably cut grass, baled and ploughed the land here around Drumsala. And hopefully my dad didn't plough up anything that he shouldn't have ploughed up. But it was just a nice story meeting Norman. He's a great man for information, but a very nice sort of personal story I had there with meeting Norman McGaw. So I was thanking Norman for that. So coming down to my last artifact item here, we're going to head back into Poyntzpass, and we're going to go to the sale yard in Poyntzpass. And this is what's known as the face in the wall here. This is the wall of the sale yard, and down here you'll see the face in the wall. And it's quite a symmetrical looking face with sort of wavy hair at the top, large eyes, and then quite a big mouth and big lips. So as I was studying the history of Drumsala, I had heard in the past that some people had thought that this stone face had come from the Drumsala. So I thought I should do a bit of investigation on that. And I spoke to a few people. Let's just see what the history of the face is. Here's an old picture of Poyntzpass showing petty sessions. Over here is the police station, and here is Alan's grocery store. And the big thing about Alan's grocery store is that they said that if you couldn't buy it in Alan's grocery store, then it wasn't for sale. They basically stocked everything. But in 1914 or 1913, 1912, there was a wall built or repaired at the back of Alan's store. So round at the back here of the store, they needed a wall repaired, and they got a man in, a stonemason in, called Ringham Miskimmin from the townland of Drumsala. And Ringham brought the stone face with him and built it into the wall. And then in the 1960s, when the sale yard was doing more business, it needed to enlarge its entrance. The stone face was moved to its current location. So that's why the stone face is in there. And therefore, when you read through those 4 bullet points, there's a number of potentials as to where that stone face came from. So the first theory is that it was from the original church, which was on the site of the Drumsala monastery, and somehow or other Ringham Miskimmin managed to get hold of it and then decided to build it into the wall. The second is that it came from the monastery, which makes it more of a 15th century stone face, and again Ringham, being from the area, managed to pick it up and then built it into the wall. The third theory is that Ringham somehow or other acquired the stone face, or maybe made it as a hobby, but he could have acquired it. Somebody was maybe asking him to fix a headstone or do some work in a church, but he acquired the stone from elsewhere. So maybe it was just a 19th century stone face, or a Victorian stone face, I suppose. Unfortunately, that's as far as I've been able to take that particular piece of analysis. I was advised that we could One way of trying to narrow this down would be to remove the stone face from the wall and take a look at the back of the head and see what that tells us. But our History Society would rather not move that stone face. I think we would prefer just to leave it as and leave it as a mystery, I think. Okay, so that's me basically finished. There is just a few things then I want to do before I finish. Reverend Lett, who I mentioned a few times, who worked in Lochbrickland, in the church in Lochbrickland. It was born Henry William Lett in 1838, born in Hillsborough. And he married a woman called Louise Kathleen Tandy from Dublin. That name was interesting because you probably some of you will have heard of Napper Tandy, one of the characters in the 1798 rebellion. Possibly Louise was a daughter or granddaughter of Napper Tandy, because we know that Napper Tandy did visit the area in Lochbrickland and Scarva, and John Reilly in his diary recorded a meeting with Napper Tandy. I don't think John Reilly was impressed, but he did. Napper Tandy was definitely in the area in Lochbrickland. But yeah, Henry Lett did do quite a number of things besides simply being a clergyman and an historian. So a very impressive CV for Henry Lett. Even a census report on the mosses in Ireland, so very impressive. The second key name that I want to mention here was Isaac and William Glennie. Isaac Glennie here on the right was a well-known antiquarian. He actually acquired, and I say acquired because, you know, I don't know why the St Mary's Church in Drumgraff, who held the bell, would have given it to him, but he got it anyway. Isaac was present when the tunnels in Donagh Moor Church were explored, which was covered in one of our earlier talks. But Isaac's son, William, carried on his father's hobby, and he would have collected artifacts from Lisnagonnell Bog and Lisnagade Fort, etc. And thankfully, on William's death, the Denny collection was sold to the Ulster Museum. Should say as well that the Denny homestead was a place called Glenvale, which is now the site of a convent, the Poor Clares, or St Sister Clare's, Poor Clare's convent in Glenvale in County Down. And just one other thing then about the Glennies. I was called after my grandfather Hugh Sands, and Hugh Sands had a cousin also called Hugh Sands. And Hugh Sands went to work. He left school when he was 13, and he went to work on the Glennie farm in a townland called Desert. And that Glennie gifted Hugh Sands money to continue his education. And the same Hugh Sands then became a missionary and went to China and was imprisoned by Chairman Mao. Eventually he was released and came back home, but then went back out again and continued to do his missionary work in China, and was imprisoned again by Chairman Mao, and then came back home. So that's a sort of a little, I've got a sort of little personal connection with the Glennie family because of the Sands. And finally, just to mention John Bell. John came from Scotland, and he moved to Dungannon in early years. He was a landscape painter. This is one of his paintings of, I think it's Durham Cathedral. But he worked in the Royal School in Dungannon. And then he started to get an interest in history, and he started writing articles in the Erie Reporter. And he covered the article about the Irish elk antlers found in Drumbanagher. He covered the story. He wrote about the Danes' cast. And he was a major collector of bells, swords, spears, etc. But on his retirement, he took all his collections back to Scotland. So we know that the Drumsallagh Bell is in Scotland, and possibly the antlers are somewhere in Scotland as well. Okay, I just want to, without this talk wouldn't have been possible without me thanking these people. Alan Clark for his immense knowledge of everything. Alexander Couples, who knows all about artifacts in and around Loch Brickland and Achadurg. Cormac Burke, fantastic book on medieval handbells. Greer Ramsey. If anybody wants, whenever I'm publishing this on Facebook, I will publish a link to the video showing how the corks are made. Helen Lanigan Wood, who I think may be on the call, give me some help around trying to identify the age of the face on the wall. Lady Alison Ross, who gave me a sort of personal tour of Birr Castle, including showing me where all the secret doors are. Thank you, Alison. Lee Vague, who showed me around Armagh Cathedral. Norman McGaw for all the great stories around Drumsala, and my father and my mother as well. Sean McClory for the Irish interpretations, and then I've actually been harvesting several articles in our journal before I forget to actually put this talk together. And that is it. Thank you very much. So I'm now going to stop sharing and pass control then back to everyone. Fiona.
Okay, Hugh, that was very interesting. Very interesting to see a number of local finds and also where they have ended up actually. So as we're currently doing some work in our garden, I will be out with my metal detector and seeing if there's anything I can come up with, and I'll definitely be looking for the Stone of St. Francis as well, just in case, you never know. Mm-hmm. Anyway, thank you very much, Hugh, for that interesting talk. It sounds as though you met a lot of interesting people along your way and finding out information and finding out some stories about your own family as well. So that was kind of nice, a nice way to lead into that. Any kind of questions from anyone, or?
Can I just ask a question, not about Hugh's talk, but the census records came out today. What happened to the Irish census 1921? And will those records come out? Does anybody in the Historical Society know at all?
Apparently there wasn't one because of the armed situation at the time. They held the next one in 1926.
Oh, thank you.
So we're going to wait another 5 years.
Okay. That's why we couldn't find anything today. Thank you.
I had a question for Hugh. Hugh, when you visited the museum in Dublin and saw the log boat, was there any information about it having been carbon dated?
There may well have been. I wasn't actually looking at that, Alan, but I'll look up my records. It's called found on a place called Lurgan in Galway, and there's probably a link on it somewhere on the internet as well. It's called the Lurgan boat. Mm-hmm. I think it's roughly twice the size of the boat that was found in Lisnagonnell.
Yeah. Well, if you're next time you're back here in England, Hugh, you nip up to Peterborough. There's a place called Flag Fen, where they found a lot of Bronze Age swords and recent discovery of about 5 log boats, all from the Bronze Age, which are all being preserved now. They're being sort of dried out in the same way as the Mary Rose was. And it seems as if the areas where you had reasonably good agricultural land on the fringes of wetlands like bogs and fens was actually very, very popular with Bronze Age people, because you had access to crops and you could farm your animals, and also there was very rich fishing. So there seems to be a lot of clustering of Bronze Age civilizations around these areas where you have, good land bordering boglands. And I'm sort of wondering whether some of the tales, some of the prehistory might be quite similar.
Yep. Okay. Yvonne, can I ask you a question? Unmute. Did you had you heard that story about Ivy House? Try again. Unmute. That's it.
Can you hear me now, Hugh?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. No, I didn't hear that story at all. I'd never heard it before.
Okay. I'll have to
I
talk
can
to my
imagine
brother
some of the
Felix.
neighbours maybe out digging.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah,
I'm going to go and get my spade.
yeah. Well, we do know that, I mean, around Lochbrickland, in the year 2000, I think it was, somebody did find a gold ingot. So it wasn't in Drumsala, but Ahaderg seems to be quite a rich piece of land for finds. But I think you can apply that to anywhere, and with technology getting better, I suppose, perhaps the finds are becoming more regular. Okay, anybody else, anything else? If not, we'll maybe call it a day.
Thank you. Enjoyed your talk.
Thank you very much on behalf of us all. And
Thanks,
just
Hugh.
to remind people that our next talk will be on Thursday, the 3rd of February, by Deirdre Graham, and it will be early public transport locally. So we will let you know where the venue for that will be, whether it'll be via Zoom again or whether it'll be live. So thank you all very much for joining us tonight. Thank you.
Thank you.
Fiona.
Thanks,
Thank
Fiona.
you.
Bye.
Bye, Maria.
Bye.
Bye. Bye, James.
Bye.
Thank you. Thanks, Hugh. Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.